improvement is a challenge. And wherever the individual is not able to function in a reasonable manner, is not able to control his own instincts and appetites to a reasonable degree, where we observe this lack of reasonable control, we know we are in the presence of the principal cause of trouble, and that the trouble will continue until this control is finally discovered, recognized, and applied. To control an energy is often difficult, for the reason that the energy arises within ourselves. We are not able always to identify it. We are not able to tell when it will suddenly emerge. We are not able always to anticipate the pressures and tensions which will accompany it. Thus, many of these experiences come upon us unawares, and before we realize what has happened, we have already made several unfortunate decisions. In the Western way of life, one of our reasons for trouble is our haste. We allow nothing to mature. We are not a contemplative people. We do not sit down quietly with ourselves. We do not have enough inner communion with our own natures to be able to say to our various pressures, "Be still." We are their victim. They come upon us while we are under other pressures. And in this complex of tensions, new elements are introduced so suddenly and sometimes so dramatically that we are unable to cope with them. One of the first problems, then, is to attempt to prevent the exceptional or extraordinary pressure from arising. We can do this usually by permitting ourselves a greater degree of personal relaxation. Relaxation does not mean laziness. It does not mean that the individual sits around with his hands folded, nor does it necessarily imply that he must get away somewhere into the mountains or the valleys and rest in the sun. Rest and relaxation are not identical things, although relaxation removes most of the need for rest as we know it. Actually, relaxation means to perform the various functions of life without tension, with a minimum of pressure. For the habit of pressure rapidly gets out of control. Once we become accustomed to doing things pressurefully, we lose the ability to do them graciously. Wherever pressure arises, there is danger. Just as the increasing pressure in a boiler may cause it to explode, so the increasing pressure in man's nervous system can cause illness. We observe today a constantly mounting pressure. The individual is responding more pressurefully to the circumstances around him than at any other time in history. To meet this requires a certain amount of conscious effort. We must resolve within ourselves to relax pressure, to achieve what we can achieve without this tremendous sense of tension. We may feel that pressure hastens results, that without this pressure things would take too long to happen. Actually, pressure does not hasten any constructive result. Pressure puts too much tension upon the body. It puts too much wear and tear upon the nervous system. Pressure is like whipping a horse carrying a heavy load. The horse may be able to struggle on more rapidly for a few feet, and then it drops dead. There is no solutional result to be gained by whipping the body, the mind, or the emotions in the effort to accomplish some particular unit of business or other activity. Some signs of the zodiac are more pressureful than others. Some reveal their pressures more immediately. Some extrovert their pressures rapidly. Others build up a tremendous amount of internal tension. And this is perhaps the most dangerous that we have to face. Internal tension, however, is not limited entirely to a type of person. Internal tension is a defense that can arise in all types of individuals under certain types of intensity. Up to a period of, say, 50 years ago, your extrovert or your introvert were two very clearly distinguished groups. The extrovert was simply a natural person who exhibited his feelings intensely and obviously. The introvert was an individual who naturally concealed his feelings, out of timidity, out of reticence, out of some form of humility or modesty, or perhaps more dramatically, out of fear itself. Today, however, introversion is becoming an artificial habit in the lives of people originally untouched by it. We are all becoming more introverted because of the apparent hopelessness of the environmental situation. We find more and more difficulty in extroverting reasonably. It appears that we are living in a world moving so rapidly and under such tremendous compulsions that there is very little to be gained by coming out, saying anything, doing anything, or being anything. Thus, we have a tendency to fall back into introversion, even though we may not be what was originally termed an introverted type. Introversion may result from discouragement as to the ability of the individual to cope with any physical or environmental circumstance. Being hopeless and sensing helplessness, the person may simply retire into himself, carrying a greater and greater amount of internal load, locked in a greater and greater degree of internal intensity. Obviously, the more this intensity builds up, the more dangerous it becomes. The more mechanically organized, the more industrialized and standardized a culture becomes, the more difficult it is for the individual to find self-expression. Lack of self-expression contributes to frustration. Where the person can make a useful contribution to a way of life, he has every incentive to be useful. Where his contribution is neither recognized nor accepted, he gradually becomes discouraged. Therefore falls back into himself, building defenses or escapes according to his natural attributes. Today, our large defense mechanism, of course, is the magnitude of world affairs. Our escape is into trivia, into any form of unreasonable activity which seemingly gives relief for the moment. Thus, the boundary lines of types are not as clear as they used to be. More and more persons are involved in large patterns over which they cannot exercise adequate management. They are more and more victims of situations apparently beyond control. This requires a new ordering, a philosophic ordering of life. The ability of the person to recognize the dignity and significance of the integration of himself. That where we cannot change other things, we still have the privilege of improving self. We have an opportunity to learn rapidly the importance of a sufficient internal life. A life that is made rich without the necessity for visible attainments. A life that is purposeful even in a society which may not recognize the purposes with which we are most concerned. The result of a purposeful organization of ourselves is that we do become an increasingly powerful minority of integrated persons whose opinions, attitudes, and achievements are available to society when society is willing to accept them. And also, we have then a voice which we can use increasingly for the good of the group. We become less likely to be moved by propaganda and common prejudices. We are not so quickly affected by negative circumstances. And as a result, we do not panic. And where emotions of panic diminish in society, many of the mistakes